Imagine a landscape where the grass is tall, the wind is sharp, and the horizon is dominated by moving boulders. But these aren't rocks, they are glyptodonts, the Pleistocene's answer to the main battle tank. To understand this creature, you have to forget everything you know about modern mammals. While most animals evolved for speed, the glyptodont evolved for total, uncompromising resistance. Standing nearly 5 feet tall and stretching 10 feet from nose to tail, the glyptodont was a masterpiece of biological engineering. At the heart of its survival strategy was the carapace. Unlike the shell of a turtle, which is fused to the ribs and spine, the glyptodont's armor was a mosaic of over 1,000 bony plates called osteoderms. These hexagonal scutes were locked together like a prehistoric jigsaw puzzle, creating a rigid, dome-shaped shield that could reach 2 inches in thickness. This wasn't just skin, it was bone grown on the outside. But the protection didn't stop at the torso. To ensure no predator could find a weak point, the glyptodont possessed a specialized bone cap on the top of its head, essentially a built-in helmet. Even its tail was encased in rings of bone, making it nearly impossible for a predator to land a meaningful bite without breaking a tooth. However, such heavy armor came with a cost. Carrying a shell that could weigh over half a ton required a massive structural overhaul of the skeleton. To support the sheer weight, the glyptodont's vertebrae were fused together in several sections, creating a stable, bridge-like support system. Its legs were short, stout, and pillar-like, built for stability rather than agility. When you watched a glyptodont move, you weren't watching a hunt. You were watching a slow, deliberate harvest. They were the ultimate low-energy specialists. With their massive, deep jaws and specialized teeth, they spent their days grinding tough grasses, largely indifferent to the world around them. In a world of saber-toothed cats and giant flightless birds, the glyptodont lived by a simple rule: if you can't be fast, be unbreakable. This chapter of Earth's history belonged to the armored giants, where survival wasn't about the fight, but about standing your ground while the world broke against you. To understand the glyptodont, we have to travel back to a time when South America was an island continent, drifting in isolation for tens of millions of years. This was a biological laboratory like no other, a place where evolution took a strange, experimental path. While the rest of the world saw the rise of lions, bears, and horses, South America was the kingdom of the xenarthrans. This strange lineage, which includes modern armadillos, sloths, and anteaters, is where our armored giant finds its humble beginnings. The story of the glyptodont's ancestry is one of radical transformation. They didn't start as multi-ton tanks. Their earliest ancestors were small insect-eating mammals that scurried through the undergrowth of tropical forests. But as the climate shifted and the lush jungles of the Eocene gave way to the vast, open grasslands of the Miocene, these animals faced a choice: get fast or get tough. The ancestors of the glyptodont chose the latter. This chapter of their history is written in the bone. Early fossils show a gradual increase in size and the progressive fusion of skin-borne ons, or osteoderms. While their cousins, the ground sloths, grew to towering heights to reach the trees, the glyptodonts expanded horizontally. They became specialized bulk feeders, developing deep, powerful jaws to process the abrasive, silica-rich grasses that were beginning to dominate the southern plains. What makes their southern roots so fascinating is the lack of placental competition. For millions of years, the only major predators they faced were terror birds, massive flightless carnivores with hooked beaks, and sparassodonts, which were carnivorous metatherians. In this environment, the glyptodont's strategy was flawless. By the time the continents finally touched, the glyptodont wasn't just a survivor, it was a masterpiece of defensive evolution, a lineage that had perfected the art of the biological bunker in the splendid isolation of the South. As we look at these early forms, we see the blueprint of a survivor. They were the product of an environment that rewarded persistence over speed. The glyptodont wasn't an invader, it was a native son of a lost world, a testament to what happens when a lineage is given millions of years to perfect one single, unbreakable idea. Their roots were deep in the red soil of the South, and they were about to take that strength to the rest of the world. If the previous chapters established the glyptodont as a passive fortress, Chapter 3 reveals their hidden, violent side. This is the era of the specialized weapon. Evolution rarely stops at impenetrable. Eventually, it develops a counterstrike. As the Pleistocene progressed, some lineages of glyptodonts, most notably the massive Doedicurus, turned their tails into one of the most devastating melee weapons in natural history. While the standard glyptodon had a tail encased in protective rings of bone, much like a flexible armored hose, the Doedicurus took a different path. It developed a massive bulbous club at the end of its tail, composed of thickened bone. But the most terrifying feature wasn't just the weight, it was the hardware. Deep pits in the fossilized clubs suggest they were once fitted with long keratinous spikes, turning the tail into a biological morning star or a medieval mace. This was not a weapon for swatting flies. Biomechanical studies of the tail's sweet spot show that a full-grown Doedicurus could swing its club with enough force to shatter the femur of a predator, or, more likely, the shell of a rival. You see, the primary target of these weapons wasn't usually a saber-toothed cat. Based on the fracture patterns found in fossilized carapaces, these tanks were often fighting each other. Imagine two 4-ton armored giants side by side, swinging maces with enough kinetic energy to crack a 2-inch thick bone shield. It was a slow-motion gladiatorial match played out across the South American pampas. To use such a weapon, the animal's anatomy had to be perfectly calibrated. Huge muscle attachment points at the base of the spine and a flexible, multi-jointed tail base allowed for a wide horizontal arc. It was a specialized adaptation for a world that was becoming more crowded and more competitive. The weapons of the Ice Age were a signal that the glyptodont was no longer just a bystander in its ecosystem. It was a heavy hitter, capable of delivering a blow that could end a life in a single, thundering strike. This was the peak of their physical evolution, a perfect marriage of the unbreakable shield and the unstoppable hammer. Around 2.7 million years ago, the world changed forever for the glyptodont. The rising of the Isthmus of Panama created a slender line bridge between North and South America, triggering one of the most significant biological events in Earth's history, the Great American Biotic Interchange. This wasn't just a migration, it was an evolutionary collision. For the first time, the living tanks of the South met the advanced predators and competitors of the North. As the gates opened, the Glyptodonts didn't just survive the journey, they conquered. While many South American marsupials crumbled under the pressure of northern placental invaders, the Glyptodonts, along with their giant ground sloth cousins, trudged steadily northward. They were biological dreadnoughts moving through Central America and eventually settling into what is now Mexico and the southern United States, from Texas to Florida. However, the North American landscape offered new challenges. They encountered the Sablodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat, and the American lion. These predators were larger and more tactical than many they had faced back home. Yet the Glyptodont's defense remained nearly perfect. A saber-toothed cat's primary weapon, its elongated, fragile teeth, was useless against a 2-inch thick bone wall. In fact, trying to bite a Glyptodont was a recipe for a broken jaw. This chapter of their lives shows us a creature at its most adaptable. They shifted from the temperate pampas to coastal wetlands and arid scrublands. They became a staple of the North American megafauna landscape, grazing alongside mammoths and giant camels. The Great Interchange proved that the Glyptodont wasn't a fragile relic of an isolated continent. It was a global tier survivor. They had successfully exported their tank philosophy to a new hemisphere, proving that no matter where you are on the planet, being unbreakable is a winning strategy. For millions of years, the Glyptodont was the ultimate survivor. It had stared down terror birds, outlasted the isolation of South America, and successfully colonized a new hemisphere. But as the Pleistocene drew to a close, roughly 10,000 years ago, the biological tank finally met a challenge it couldn't simply shrug off. The end of the armored giants wasn't caused by a single blow, but by a lethal combination of shifting skies and a new kind of predator. The first blow was environmental. The world was warming. The vast, cool grasslands that the Glyptodonts called home began to fragment. As the Ice Age retreated, rainfall patterns shifted, turning their reliable grazing pastures into dense forests or arid deserts. For a multi-ton animal with a highly specialized diet and a slow metabolic rate, adapting to a rapidly changing menu was an uphill battle. The fortress was becoming a prison in a world that demanded mobility. But the final chapter features a more direct protagonist, Paleo-Indians. As humans migrated into the Americas, they encountered a creature that was essentially a slow-moving mountain of meat protected by a shell. While a saber-toothed cat couldn't pierce a Glyptodont's armor, a human with a spear, a heavy stone, and a tactical mind certainly could. Archaeological sites in South America have revealed a fascinating and grim relationship between humans and these giants. Hunters likely targeted the soft underbelly or the exposed neck, areas the Glyptodont's shell couldn't reach. Perhaps the most haunting evidence of this era is the discovery of Glyptodont carapaces found in inverted positions near ancient campsites. It appears that early humans didn't just eat these animals, they repurposed them. A 5-foot-wide waterproof bone dome made for a perfect ready-made roof. For a nomadic tribe, a dead Glyptodont was both a feast and a homestead. By the dawn of the Holocene, the last of the Glyptodonts had vanished, leaving only their modern, much smaller cousins, the armadillos, to carry on the lineage. They left behind a fossil record that tells a story of incredible defensive success, ending only when the world changed too fast for even the strongest armor to withstand. The living tank was decommissioned not by a better weapon, but by a changing world that no longer had a place for the slow and the unbreakable.